From the Rafters of Rupp is brought to you by Bud's Gun Shop, Don Franklin's Auto Mall, Double Dogs, Friends of Coal, Hunt Brothers Pizza, Kentucky Farm Bureau.
Hello everybody and welcome to From the Rafters of Rupp. I'm Kyle Macy. Throughout this series, we continue to feature the exclusive group of Kentucky Wildcats whose time-honored jerseys forever hang in the rafters of Rupp Arena. You may recall during our first show, over 4 years ago, we highlighted 2 former Wildcats instead of the current format featuring 1 honoree per episode. Today, including never-before-seen footage from the original interview, we devote a full episode to the accomplished career of one of Kentucky's most treasured Wildcats, Coach Joe B. Hall. Joe Beesman Hall was born in Cynthiana, Kentucky in November of 1928. He developed into an outstanding all-around athlete at a young age and started at quarterback for his Cynthiana high school football team for 3 seasons. In basketball, Joe B. led the Cynthiana Bulldogs to the finals of the 10th region in 1946. He led the team in scoring and was named Honorable Mention All-State after his senior year. Joe Hall arrived on UK's campus in the fall of 1947. He tried out for Coach Adolph Rupp along with hundreds of would-be Kentucky players before finally being selected to the final UK roster. As timing would have it, Joe B. joined the Wildcat program during one of the most successful runs in Kentucky basketball history.
My freshman year was the year of the Fabulous Five. That was Kenny Rollins was the only senior on that squad, along with Ralph Beard, Cliff Barker, Wawa Jones, and Alex Groza. Of course, the Fabulous Five had won the national championship, and then without Kenny Rollins, they won it again, 47-48.
Coach Adolph Rupp was known to rarely substitute for his starting 5. Joe B. played in only 3 varsity games his sophomore season. It was not the college basketball experience he had hoped for.
And I told Coach that I'd been thinking about maybe transferring. And I went in and talked to Coach and asked him if he would help me get located someplace. And he was very good about it. I think he was happy to have my scholarship. Well, next day I went and asked Coach Rupp if he knew Lon Varnell, which he did. He said, well, he came and worked with us a year. He said, would you go to Sewanee? I said, yeah, I can play right now.
Coach Hall's time at Sewanee paved the way for a very unique basketball experience that followed. It was an experience that allowed Joe B. to travel and extend his playing days on the court.
Coach Varnell sponsored the Globetrotters. He was their front man and set up games throughout the South. The first Southern trip that the Globetrotters ever made. And so he assembled a team. There were 7 of us. And we traveled with the Globetrotters and we played local teams. We played Olympic teams, national teams in each country that we were in. We played in Casablanca, Bonn, Algiers, Italy, Milan, Switzerland, Germany, France, Belgium, Holland, and it was a great experience. I wouldn't take anything for it.
In 1956, Joe Hall applied and was hired to coach basketball at Shepherdsville High School in Bullitt County. In only his 2nd season on the job, he compiled a 21-6 record and guided the Rams to the finals of the 8th region. He realized he'd found his calling.
I had a kid that the Regis coach came in and looked at, and he liked him and wanted to recruit him. And I asked him if there were any good high school jobs in Colorado. He said, would you move to Colorado? I said, yeah, I'd move. So he went back, he called me and said he had an opening for an assistant and wanted to know if I'd come out and be his assistant. And so I did. I went out and was interviewed, accepted the job, moved my family in a U-Haul trailer with a big chair tied on the back, and stayed as the freshman junior varsity coach 1 year and the assistant varsity. Then the next year I was hired as a head coach, and I coached 5 years head coach at Regis.
We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Hunt Brothers Pizza has been proudly serving communities across America for over 25 years. Download the Hunt Brothers Pizza app to find one of our 7,500 locations inside a convenience store near you.
Are you a sporting shooter, hunter, or looking for the best concealed carry option? Bud's Gun Shop and Range is Kentucky's largest selection of firearms, ammunition, and firearm accessories, located on Industry Road in Lexington.
Coach Hall's success at Regis caught the eye of several major college programs, including Kentucky. He left Regis in 1964 and spent 1 year as the head coach at Central Missouri University.
And then Coach Rupp was doing a clinic in St. Louis, and I was there as a spectator. And as he left after his presentation, he motioned me to follow him, and so I went up to his room. And then he asked me if I would come back as his first assistant.
Prior to the 1965-66 season, Coach Hall arrived as an assistant at Kentucky and implemented his now infamous preseason conditioning program. It didn't take long for the returning players to balk at the newly installed training routine.
I think after about 2 weeks, they went to Coach Rupp and told him, said, "Coach, that guy's killing us." Said, "You won't have a team come October the 15th. They hadn't really trained properly over the summer, and they came in woefully out of shape. So the program was a little more stressful because of their lack of conditioning. But that was the year of the Rupp's runs. They had had not a very good year the year before, and they came back and were in great shape and went to the final game of the NCAA.
At the start of the 1972-73 basketball season, Coach Joe Hall was hired to replace the legendary Adolph Rupp at UK. Coach Hall and I talked about what it meant to him to be named the head coach at the University of Kentucky.
Well, it was a great tradition. Coach Rupp had won 4 national championships. I had experienced 2 of them, and it was a program that was at the peak in the basketball world, and I wanted to use that tradition to continue and be a part of my program. And they had since moved from the old alumni gym to Memorial Coliseum, which was the show place at that time in the SEC. And I felt that I had a great city to recruit to, an attractive college town. I had that history of success. I had a beautiful campus and university and a great building to play in.
In Coach Hall's 3rd season at UK, the Cats were led by senior veterans Kevin Greavy, Mike Flynn, Bob Guyette, Jerry Hale, and Jimmy Dan Connor. It was the incoming freshman class, however, that rounded the team into a legitimate national contender.
We picked up Robey and Phillips that next year, Givens and Lee, and we suddenly became a big team with depth.
Kentucky's march through the 1975 NCAA tournament included a 92-90 win over the number 1 ranked and undefeated Indiana Hoosiers. Before Kentucky met UCLA in the finals, Coach John Wooden gave notice to the press that this would be his last game for the Bruins.
He knew that he was going to retire, and he didn't have as good a team as the ones he had had in the past years, but before our game, he announced his retirement. And I felt like that was almost a shot in the heart, having him and playing in San Diego and the nostalgia that followed him in his career was going to be a big factor in that game.
The Cats fell to UCLA 92-85 and finished the 75 season as NCAA national runner-ups. The following year, the Cats reeled off 10 straight wins to end the season and finished the year winning the NIT championship. In 1977, the Cats fell to North Carolina 79-72 in the East Regional Finals, but with returning seniors Rick Robey, Mike Phillips, Jack Gibbons, and James Lee, along with a Purdue transfer, the 1978 version of the Kentucky Wildcats were poised to live up to high expectations and their #1 preseason ranking.
Kentucky Farm Bureau Insurance. Big on commitment.
We never set out to be the largest auto dealer in Kentucky. He just set out to provide people reliable vehicles and great customer service. And for the last 50 years, that's what we've done.
The 1978 squad was talented and deep. The Cats spent nearly the entire season ranked as #1 in the country. Kentucky boasted a 25-2 record heading into the NCAA tournament play and were favored to win it all. Coach Hall recalls his frustration as his team struggled and trailed 39-32 at halftime in the Wildcats' first-round matchup against Florida State.
We were 7 down at halftime. We'd been as much as 9 down. And the starters sat there on the bench and thought, well, he's going to leave us here. And that was Jack and Truman and Rick Robey. The second group cut the lead to 3 or 4 points. Right. And then the starters went back in and they played like they had been playing, and we win by 7, 8, 9.
The Cats went on to defeat Florida State 85-76 to advance in tournament play. Then wins over Miami of Ohio and #4 ranked Michigan State, led by All-American Magic Johnson, landed Kentucky in the Final Four. Arkansas then fell to the Cats 65-59 in the first Final Four contest, setting up a championship game battle with the Duke Blue Devils in St. Louis, Missouri.
They spread their 2-3 zone and left it open in the middle. Duke was very conscious of Phillips and Robey in the low post. So they kept Gaminsky and Spanarkel and those guys back, right. Banks and Denard. And then Spanarkel and the other kid came up for fear of you and Truman hitting the outside shot. So there was a huge gap in the middle. But when Jack broke in there, he was wide open. So we just scrapped the other options and went to Jack coming into that opening. But I don't think anything was as dramatic as the hot hand that Jack Gibbons had in that game.
Kentucky led by as many as 20 points in the second half. And when James Lee slammed home a thunderous dunk with seconds remaining on the clock, the Cats had clinched the school's 5th NCAA national championship with a 94-88 win over Duke. I asked Coach Hall what was going through his mind as the final horn sounded.
I was thinking back to the UCLA loss, and I remembered going in the dressing room after that game, and my son, who was a young kid at that time, was sitting up on the taping table. And I went over to him and I said, don't worry, we'll get one of these days. So after that win, I went over in the stands and told Steve, I said, see, I told you, we'll get one.
Under Coach Hall, the Cats made another run at an NCAA championship in 1984. In a Final Four matchup at the Kingdome in Seattle, Washington, the Cats held a 7-point halftime lead over the Georgetown Hoyas. After a nightmare second-half shooting performance, however, the Cats dropped a 53-40 decision to Georgetown and limped home well short of championship expectations. The following year, in 1985, the Cats made a return trip to the NCAA tournament for the 10th time in 13 seasons under Coach Hall. When the Cats were handed an 86-70 loss to number 3 ranked St. John's in the round of 16, Coach Hall felt the time had come to look at the possibility of retirement.
If you've ever been in that position with the intensity of pressure and the challenge of the past success, not only that I had experienced personally, but the program itself, it wears on you. And the feeling I had is that I neglected my family. I would go a month without seeing my kids standing up. They'd be in bed by the time I got home, and they'd be off to school time I'd get up. And that was a strange kind of life. And I had a desire to live like a normal person.
We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
The coal industry's had a big impact on my life. My grandfather was a coal miner, my father was a coal miner. Coal is the largest driving force in our local economy. That's why I'm a friend of coal.
Double Dogs is a great place to eat. In a single word, delicious.
Coach Hall was saddled with carrying out one of the most difficult tasks in all of sports. He followed in the shadows and the footsteps of an iconic legend. Coach Hall proved successful in keeping the Kentucky program at the top of college basketball's hierarchy for 13 seasons. He did it with class, integrity, hard work, and some very talented college basketball players. We discussed some of the outstanding players Coach Hall had the honor to work with during his time as coach at the University of Kentucky, starting with Kentucky's all-time leading scorer and two-time consensus All-American, Dan Issel.
Dan Issel was a player who came into the program with limited skill in the low post, but Dan had a great desire to excel. He really worked. He gave all his effort to develop in his game. He became an excellent scorer on the inside. He had great use of his body. He had a terrific pair of hands, and he was extremely intelligent. He was strictly business on the court, tended to his job and making the other players better, and just was an ideal player to work with.
Two-time All-American, Sam Bowie.
Sam Bowie, in my mind, would have been one of the greatest pros and college players of all time. I think he would have ranked right up there with Jabbar and Walton and Duncan and many of the great centers. Sam was tall, had a great wingspan. He could hit the outside shot. He was a good free throw shooter. He was a good passer and team man. He was a shot blocker that was alert on the floor all the time. And had he made the progression after his sophomore year, in which he got hurt, that he made between his freshman and sophomore year, I think he'd been one of the greatest players of all time.
Number 2 on Kentucky's all-time scoring list and two-time consensus All-American, Kenny Walker.
He may have been the best undersized postman in history of the game of basketball, and was one of the greatest players I ever coached. He gave 150% effort every practice, every day out. So agreeable in what you ask him to do. He was a joy to coach.
Two-time All-American and number 3 overall pick in the 1978 NBA draft, Rick Robey.
Rick was an ideal postman. He had the size. He was very strong. He played with great effort, always with a smile on his face, nothing ever malicious, but he wouldn't let anybody push him around. He was just a great inside player.
After Coach Hall retired in 1985, he's remained one of Kentucky's program's top supporters. He certainly enjoyed spending more time with his family. And he has fished a lot. Perhaps one of his most enjoyable retirement experiences was working with Coach Denny Crum on the successfully syndicated Joby and Denny radio show.
Denny and I were always friends. I think it demonstrated so much to the public about the true meaning of competition and the respect for an opponent, and that you could coexist outside of sports.
I asked Coach Hall what it means to him to have his jersey hanging in Rupp Arena and how he'd like to be remembered by the Big Blue Nation.
It's a great thing. I would have never made it as a player, but to be honored that way with all of those great players, and Coach Rupp, and Kaywood Ledford, and Bill Kiley, that was just a super honor, one that I cherish. I don't know, people have their own way of remembering me. Some of them good, some of them bad. The only ones I worry about are my family and my players. If I was fair, if I rewarded the ones that deserved it, had no ulterior motives, made every decision for the best of the team and the Kentucky basketball program, and there was no selfishness on my part, that's the way I'd want to be remembered.
Coach Joby Hall won a total of 373 games in his college coaching career at Regis, Central Missouri State, and the University of Kentucky. His 297 victories at UK place him third on the all-time win list among Kentucky coaches, behind only Adolph Rupp and current head coach John Calipari. While at Kentucky, Coach Hall won 8 regular season Southeastern Conference championships, 1 SEC tournament title, an NIT championship in 1976, appeared in 3 Final Fours, and captured the NCAA National Championship trophy in 1978. Coach Hall was named SEC Coach of the Year 4 times and received National Coach of the Year honors after the Cats National Championship season. Coach Hall was inducted into the State of Kentucky Athletic Hall of Fame in 1989 and the University of Kentucky Hall of Fame in 2005. The Big Blue faithful remember Coach Joby Hall as a dedicated home state kid who grew up and preserved the mighty tradition of the Kentucky Wildcat basketball program. Joe Hall brought home a national championship to the Commonwealth and has represented the University of Kentucky with grace and dignity for more than 60 years. Thank you, Coach Hall, for your unwavering dedication and support of the University of Kentucky. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hope to see you next time when we'll hear more tales from the Rafters of Rupp.
From the Rafters of Rupp was brought to you by Bud's Gun Shop, Don Franklin's Auto Mall, Double Dogs, Friends of Coal, Hunt Brothers Pizza, Kentucky Farm Bureau, and by Rafferty's.